All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm so pleased that you are able to join us for today's presentation. And I want to remind everyone that we are coming up on One Ball State Day on April the 4th, and there will be opportunities for you to support the libraries. And we hope that you will certainly consider doing that. We've been able to accomplish so much through the friendship of our donors and those who support our work here at the university libraries, and the wonderful impact that we're having on student learning, on faculty success, and community engagement, all things that are really at the heart of the work that we're doing and the things that we're going to be talking about today, which are very relevant to the moment in which we find ourselves in. So we're thrilled that you're here. I know that you're going to be learning a great deal, and I'm going to turn it over to our assistant to the executive secretary, Nick Havranek, and he will take us forward into the program. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Dean Shaw. Yes, welcome and thank you for attending this next event in the Friends Lunch and Learn series. My name is Nick Havranek, as Dean Shaw said, and I'm the assistant to the executive secretary of the Friends of Bracken Library. And just as a heads up, this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Ball State University Library's YouTube channel afterwards. So the virtual Lunch and Learn series is on the third Thursday of every month, a brief online program that highlights some kind of activity that University Libraries is taking part in, or a workshop type thing like this one. And it's aimed at all students, faculty, and community members, so anyone can join. So feel free to share those registration links if you feel so inclined. And the programs are always free, so anyone can join. This one is the Media Literacy in a Post-Truth World event. And we are going to discuss ways to be intentional in your media consumption and information sharing, and how to evaluate information for accuracy, authority, and bias, and how to contribute to the information ecosystem ethically. Katie Lorton will be our presenter, and she is the Director of Research and Branch Services here at University Libraries. So without further ado, I will hand it off to her.
Well, thank you, Nick, for that introduction, and thank you, Dean Shaw. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So in my role here at the libraries, I oversee several of our public-facing units, including our branch libraries, the Education, Music, and Media Department, our MAPS collection, and Research and Teaching Services. And the team of librarians that I work with in all of those areas are involved in our liaison program, which provides outreach and library instruction across campus and works to build relationships to support faculty and students in their assigned liaison areas. A little bit about my background. I'm actually a Ball State graduate, and then I got my start in libraries working at Ivy Tech Community College, where I was working as an instructional librarian, going out into classes and teaching students how to use the library, about the concepts of information and media literacy. I then spent about a decade working in a public library, which I really loved that work as well. But after about a decade there, I was ready for a change. And so last summer, I came back to Ball State and had the opportunity to go back to my roots, so to speak, and get back to the work that I started with in libraries, that work of information literacy instruction. And one of the things that I think that I learned from my time in public library is that these skills, knowing how to find trustworthy information, being able to critically evaluate a source, these aren't just skills for research in college. They're skills that all of us can use in our daily lives, especially in today's information ecosystem. You know, we're all carrying around little mini computers in our pockets. We can literally have the answer to any question in seconds. So being able to actually find the right answer is even more critical. So that's a little about me and the point of view that I'm bringing to this topic. So our session today is media literacy in a post-truth world. And our agenda today, we're going to talk about some of the challenges in the post-truth information ecosystem. We'll also talk about what information literacy or media literacy is and the 4 domains of meta-literate learning. So to start with, we'll basically have a little theory on those 2 points. Then we will also get into some practical tips on how you can develop your own information and media literacy skills. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about how university libraries advances student learning in information and media literacy. So to get started, I've got a little activity for everybody. You can see here 3 recent news stories. So I would like for you to look these over and see if you can tell which of these stories is fake news. Which story here is not real? If you are feeling brave, I would encourage you to drop your answer in the Zoom chat and maybe even tell me why you think so. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to look these over. And like I said, drop your answers in the chat if you're feeling brave. So the first A, we've got Inside Austria's Help Desk for Lost Travelers. The headline here is, so many travelers who intend to visit Australia are accidentally buying tickets to Austria that the country's 2nd largest airport has had to set up a special counter to redirect misguided tourists. Then we've got our second story about fines coming for T-Mobile customers who violate the code of conduct. Out of Boston, Massachusetts, the wireless carrier will begin flagging individuals who send text messages with certain content. And then C, we have a deadly contagion known as disease X is emerging and under discussion at the World Economic Forum. Global healthcare experts this week spoke on a WEF panel called Preparing for Disease X. So we've got some comments coming in the chat. Maybe option B is fake news, maybe option C. Let's take a look. Actually, these are all fake news stories. And the source of this misinformation, quote unquote, this actually came from recent entries in the AP's Not Real News column that debunks false news claims that are circulating on the internet. I created these headlines myself using a tool called the Fake News Generator, which is not as nefarious as it sounds. It is a website that's created by coder Justin Hook all the way back in 2018 as really kind of a fun and salient way to draw attention to this issue of fake news. So the facts you can see portrayed there underneath. It looks like maybe some folks were actually fooled. I think the interesting thing about these stories is, all of these really did make the rounds on social media and got sufficient attention that the AP felt the need to feature that story and to debunk it. There's actually there's at least a grain of truth in all of these. You can see, in the second story, there has been a plan introduced by T-Mobile, but it's really for the businesses, not at the individual consumer level. The same thing with the third option. Disease X is actually a term that is used, but it is a hypothetical virus, not a real virus. And the first one is there's actually a billboard out there that makes a joke about Austria and Australia, but there really is no counter in Austria to redirect folks that meant to go to Australia. So we'll talk a little bit more about the role that images can play in misinformation, because part of the reason why all of these news stories can look a little bit more credible is sometimes they come with an image associated with them. Okay, so I want to start with a little context and theory before we kind of get into the practical aspect of the presentation, and to just start with a couple of definitions. So likely you are already familiar with these terms, but we're going to focus in and help set the stage for our discussions today. So according to Oxford Dictionaries, post-truth is an adjective relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. Now, post-truth has been really prominent in our cultural lexicon since about 2016, but the term can actually be traced back as far as 1992. It has been explored through the lens of various social upheavals throughout the 1970s and 90s, things like the Vietnam War, Watergate, the scandals in the Reagan and Clinton and Bush eras. And post-truth is also closely connected with the concept of postmodernism and the idea that our definition of truth has changed. Thomas Mackey is a professor of arts and media at SUNY Empire State and a researcher of meta-literacy, which is a concept we'll discuss a bit later. It's a related concept to information and media literacy. And he has this to say about post-truth as a postmodern phenomenon. Quote, "There is no longer an objective truth because any individual or group is capable of defining its own reality based on particular social circumstances and explanations." Now, media literacy is defined as providing a framework to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and participate with messages in a variety of forms, from print to video to the internet. It builds an understanding of the role of media in society, as well as essential skills of inquiry and self-expression that are necessary for citizens of a democracy. Media literacy as a concept has been in circulation for quite a long time, but you can see how as our society becomes more and more post-truth, that these skills are becoming even more important. Now, as another bit of context for our discussion today, I also want to discuss information-seeking behavior, which is exactly what it sounds like. And it's a really important concept in the work of information literacy librarians. So a person's information needs tends to fall into one of four domains. First, their daily life and pragmatic needs. So this could include things such as needing information to make a personal financial or legal decision, to access consumer health information, or if you're like me, even deciding what kind of dryer that you have to buy because your current dryer gives out after just 3 years of owning it. I had to do that recently. Also, academic and education needs, that's pretty obvious. That includes seeking information for the purposes of one's own education, reading a textbook, locating sources for a research paper, etc. Professional and career needs, so after one's education, the type of information that users are needing to consult with routinely as part of their job. So this could be professional literature, trade publications, looking up certain products, things like that. And finally, recreation, entertainment, and personal enrichment needs. So that could be finding a new book to read at the public library, could be learning about a new hobby, planning a vacation, or resolving an argument with friends over 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. So as humans, we pursue information to meet our needs across these four domains. And all of that, of course, comes quite naturally to us, and everything goes perfectly, and we always get accurate, trustworthy information, right? Obviously, that's not the case. If it were, there wouldn't be a need for librarians like me. And as we think about media specifically and the way that users seek and interact with news and journalism in today's world, this has applications in really all four of these domains. And some of these domains can be hugely shaped by algorithms, ratings, influencers, and increasingly artificial intelligence. And all of those things contribute to a pretty problematic environment for information seeking. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So there are various factors that can get in the way of our ability to seek information effectively. And I think about these in two categories: external factors and then internal factors. So external, these are those things relating to the information environment. We know we're living in a world of information overload. The phenomenon of news as entertainment is really a challenge, as the lines between real reporting and opinion-based analysis are increasingly blurred. You've likely heard the term digital native, but we've actually been living with 24-hour news natives for quite some time now. And Now the online world, especially social media, have only compacted that further with the drive for clicks, dwell time really being prioritized so that media outlets, content creators, platforms, they're all essentially rewarded for generating and hosting more sensational and extreme content. So that gives rise to what is known as clickbait. And one thing we see, especially in clickbait articles and other highly sensationalist media, is a misinformation technique known as intersemiotic contextual misrepresentation of photojournalism. That's a very long term. That essentially means that the text and the picture may not necessarily match and creates an implication about the story that is not true. And then, of course, there's outright fake news, literally false stories that are masquerading as news. But there's also the issue that fake news as a term is problematic itself now because of the way that it has been appropriated by groups to discredit reputable news sources when the news reporting, the group does not approve of that or agree with it. I mentioned algorithms a minute ago, and of course, we all know how the current digital environment, always having our cell phones on us, always being logged in and plugged into tools like our Google accounts, our Apple accounts, Facebook, Meta, Amazon Alexa, all of those things creates a situation where our behaviors and our movements are continually tracked, sometimes in ways that we are not even aware of. And then those same programs are feeding us back content, whether it's the order of search results that we see in Google, or the videos that YouTube suggests for us, or the ads that pop up in our social media. All of that is driven by algorithms. And as news stories are also increasingly suggested to us and shared by these tools, that's also driven by algorithms. And then that can create what we call a filter bubble, kind of an echo chamber in which we're only fed a certain type of content or information. And sometimes that content can become increasingly extreme or sensationalist. And then now, with the exponential rise of AI, this is creating a whole new set of issues. It's becoming more and more likely for information seekers to be presented with AI-generated information and images in their daily lives. All of the major search engines have either already adopted AI or are experimenting with it as a way of responding to user queries. Bing is one in particular that has already done that, and they are using generative AI to respond to searches. And then AI-generated art is becoming more prevalent as well. That's really commonly shared on popular social media platforms like Instagram and YouTube. We could have a whole other session, probably a whole series of workshops just on AI. But if you've been paying attention to this space at all, I'm sure you're already aware of some of the primary concerns about AI. It can hallucinate answers, which means the AI is essentially just making stuff up. There are also concerns about where the information that an AI tool sources its information from, where that's coming from, and how that information is attributed or not attributed. And of course, all of this is also tied up with privacy and security concerns, intellectual property, and the ethics of information use and sharing in digital spaces. So fortunately, on the AI side of things, there has been some progress. OpenAI, the company that owns ChatGPT and the image generator DALL-E, they are adopting metadata that will be applied to AI-generated images with the goal of being able to trace an image back to its original media and that was used to create that image. And then Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, they also recently announced that they will begin labeling AI content that is shared on their platforms. So those are steps in the right direction, but there's obviously still a lot of work to be done, and there's never going to be a perfect solution. And that's why it's important that as consumers of information, we are also now adding AI literacy to our tool belt as we're navigating the information ecosystem. Okay, so that's a lot. And if that was not enough to get in the way of our ability to effectively assess and evaluate information, there are also several internal or personal factors as well. So this includes things like our biases, confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out information that confirms our already held beliefs. There's a similar tendency called identity protective cognition that's described in a 2017 paper by Dan Kahan as the way that our brains use reason to protect our own identities, and that this type of cognition is activated when information contradicts beliefs that are associated with our various affiliations. So Kahan writes, when individuals apprehend largely unconsciously that holding one or another position is critical to conveying who they are and whose side they are on, they engage information in a manner geared to generating identity consistent rather than factually accurate beliefs. And perhaps the extreme conclusion of this sort of thinking is a state of ideological imperviousness or invulnerability described by Janine Weeks Schroer all the way back in 2007, really well before the rise of our current post-truth environment. She defines this as a feeling that one has, quote, the right to have one's ideology or worldview totally unaffected by and indifferent to criticism, the right to leave one's own views generally unconsidered. It's a state in which the individual is really completely resistant to engaging with ideas that may make them feel uncomfortable or make them feel as though their identity is challenged. So obviously in that state, your ability to learn and to grow really becomes severely curtailed. I am hoping that, by the fact that you are here today, you are interested in keeping your own media literacy skills sharp and flexible so that this is a mindset you can avoid falling into. Okay, earlier I mentioned Thomas Mackey and the concept of meta-literacy, which he developed with librarian Trudy Jacobson. So meta-literacy, according to metaliteracy.org, is a pedagogical model that empowers learners to be reflective and informed producers of information, both individually and in collaboration with others. They go on to say that meta-literacy supports the acquisition, production, and sharing of knowledge in collaborative online communities. So meta-literacy involves 4 goals, which I have here on the slide for you. Actively evaluate content while also evaluating one's biases. Engage with all intellectual property ethically and responsibly. Produce and share information in collaborative and participatory environments. And develop learning strategies to meet lifelong personal and professional goals. And in the meta-literacy framework, learning happens beyond simply the cognitive or behavioral skills-based domains, but consideration is also given to the affective and metacognitive domains. So this could include changes in learners' emotions or attitudes that may take place through engaging with information, and also encouraging learners to think about their own thinking and to be reflective about their consumption and creation of information. When I was coming up in libraries, our approach to media literacy and information literacy was very skills-based. Know when you need information, then locate it, evaluate it, use it. But in recent years, our conversation has been shifting to focus more on dispositions like those that we see here in the meta-literacy framework. And what I find particularly useful about this approach, especially within the context and environment that we are in, is that it is really based in inquiry, in discourse, in reflection, building empathy and understanding for other points of view. And it also situates the information seeker not only as a consumer, but also a creator of information, as active participants in the information environment. That's critical for today's information and digital environment. We hear the term content creator a lot, and we assume that that's somebody who blogs or makes YouTube videos or podcasts. But every casual user of Instagram, every Reddit contributor, every person who leaves a review on Amazon even, you're contributing to the total aggregate of information available on the internet. So in some small way, you are a content creator. All right, so all of that is a bit of theory and context that situates us in our discussion. We're going to turn our attention now to some of the strategies that you can employ to be a savvy information seeker. And as we go through these, you'll notice that there are some skills and tactics that you can employ, but we're also going to talk about those dispositions and those habits of mind that you can adopt, and the importance of reflection and metacognitive work as you engage with information. Okay, so first up, a simple thing that you can do when interacting with information is to use the SIFT method. This is the method that you can use to determine things like authority, credibility, and accuracy. It's a technique developed by misinformation scholar Mike Caulfield in 2017. It is particularly effective when fact-checking information on the web. So the 4 moves in the SIFT process are stop, investigate the source, find better coverage, and trace claims. And we'll talk about each of those here we'll talk through those. So stop. When you first land on a page or post, you want to stop before you read. Consider whether you know what the source is. So the reputation of the website, the news outlet, the social media account, etc. Whatever package that information is coming to you in, do you know it? Stop reminds us to take our time before rushing headlong into any piece of online information, and it also reminds us to stop and think before we share. Investigate. You want to take 60 seconds to examine who the author or the publisher of the information is, and to consider what authority they have to write about that subject. Find. At this point in the process, we start to employ a strategy known as lateral reading. When we find better or alternate coverage, we are seeking context. Does what we're reading represent a consensus viewpoint? Or is it a subject of much controversy? Or is it a unique or a fringe idea? In this strategy, we basically spend some time Googling the subject and claim at hand and find the same coverage in other media, other news articles, etc., on the same topic. And for bonus points, we are also considering the authority and expertise of those other sources as well as we're going through that process. And then trace claims. So here is where we get into fact checking. We also start to seek a little more context here. In this part, we want to look at the claims that are made in the original article. For example, if there's a quote that's given, go back and look at the original quote. Was that quote taken out of context, or does it accurately represent the claim being made? Is there information that's presented in the original source as a fact? Hopefully the author has cited their source, and you can go and verify that information. If not, do some digging and see if you can find good authoritative sources that are in agreement with that information given. And then as an example of this method in practice, I have a short clip to show you on our next screen here. So this is Mike Caulfield himself, and the video comes from the Control F Digital Media Literacy Initiative from Civics, which is a Canadian nonprofit working to foster citizenship habits in young people. So I think this is a nice little video. Let me
In the last video, we talked about how fact checkers outperformed some of the smartest people in the world. In this video, I want to show you one of the techniques they use to do that. Let's go back to the original example. Okay, we were looking at these 2 sites. One of them was a long-respected professional organization. One of them was considered by many to be basically a hate site, right? So how did the fact checkers quickly discern that it was a hate site? Now, this may sound absurdly simple. They came to this page, the American College of Pediatricians, but they didn't read it. They got off it. They went to another page. They went and did a Google search. They started asking themselves, who are these people publishing this information? Once you put in a search like that, a Wikipedia page comes up that talks about it as a socially conservative advocacy group. Its membership, it says, is estimated at 500. You'll see that they have an annual budget somewhere of around 80,000. This is not a comparable organization to the American Academy of Pediatricians. The point here is, in order to find out the truth about an organization you're looking at, do not look at what the organization says about itself. Look at what the web is telling you about the organization. That's where you're going to find the truth of the matter. I'll show you one trick that you can do that makes this technique super fast. Most fact checkers use Wikipedia as a starting point. It's usually a great first stop for investigating journalistic sources and organizations. Take this example, an article from a publication called The Telegraph. So a lot of times I'll come to a site like this and I'll wonder, is this really a news site? So here's what I can do. I can go up to the location bar and I can chop off everything after that initial domain name. Then I type Wikipedia after it. Don't forget the space. And then I hit return. Now, if you do that, it will float the Wikipedia page to the top of your search results. And if you click into that Wikipedia article, you can see The Telegraph turns out to be a well-respected publication. You can do this with organizations, publications, experts. Wikipedia won't always return a high-quality article, but it usually returns a good starting point. If you get to a Wikipedia article and you're not sure you can trust it, just scroll to the bottom. Every fact in Wikipedia should be sourced to another publication. By clicking through to those articles, you can verify the individual facts in the Wikipedia article.
Okay. All right, moving on a bit. So earlier we talked about algorithms and filter bubbles, how the internet of today is really designed to track our activities, the things we search for, the time we spend on certain content, even when we have geographic tools turned on, like our GPS on our cell phones, it can even track the places that we go. In turn, internet advertising and social media feeds us back content that it thinks we are interested in. So this personalization of the web can create a situation known as a filter bubble, in which we start to receive very homogeneous media messages, and the information that we encounter conforms to and reinforces our own beliefs. How do we disrupt this? The first thing is to simply be aware that it's happening. It's kind of like being aware of one's own implicit biases. This is simply a bias that's present in our digital lives. So by being aware of it, we can start to correct for it. One strategy to raise your awareness of this is to compare search tools. So try it out sometime. Do the same web search across multiple search engines, for example. Compare how the search results rankings are going to differ from tool to tool, even when presenting the results to the same person, just to you as a person. So this can help you to realize the ways that not all information is quote unquote equal on the internet. And another comparison tool is the split screen project from Citizen Browser. I'm going to actually drop this link in the chat for you. So feel free to hop away for a second and check that out. I'll keep talking while you're doing that. So this site, it's a couple years old now, but it's still a really great way to visualize these differences in information bubbles that algorithms can create, depending on who you are or who the internet thinks you are. And this project is specifically focused on Facebook recommendations. It includes data from between 2021 and 2022. Participants in the project were sorted into self-disclosed pairing groups. So men versus women, millennials versus boomers, Trump voters versus Biden voters. And then the project took daily captures of participants' Facebook feeds and then compared the content across pairing types. So if you're looking at the website yourself, you'll see that that's an interactive page. You can choose which pairing group you want to look at. You can select a time period, and then you can scroll through the comparison side-by-side feeds. Those are really an aggregate view of the content that was presented to those groups. I have a couple of screenshots here on my slide if you're not scrolled or hopped away on the website. So this will give you a sort of idea. So on the left side, we've got content that was given to women. And then on the right side, we've got content that was given to men. Another important strategy to help correct for these algorithmic filter bubbles is, of course, to audit your social media and browser settings. It's, to be honest, becoming increasingly difficult to participate in society without using some of these internet-based tools and services, the sorts of things that are going to require you to be logged in, require you to accept cookies. But I encourage you to be mindful of how you do so. I have a little poll here, that I'm going to pull up. So here on the left, you have a QR code. So if you have your cell phone handy, you can snap a picture of the QR code and go to the poll. If not, you can navigate in your browser to slido.com and enter this code below, and that's going to take you to this poll. So the poll is asking you, just how aware are you of your current privacy settings for your social media accounts, internet browsers, and mobile apps? Your answers are anonymous. I want you to be honest, though. Tell me how you would rate your awareness in these areas. So if you're a privacy pro, that means that you know exactly what privacy settings you have in place. You check in on your various apps and platforms regularly. You make sure that your settings reflect the way that you want to interact with the platform. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have all of the highest privacy settings in place, but if you're choosing more lax privacy settings, you're doing it consciously and that you understand the risks. So it just means that you're conscientious about what cookies you accept as you browse the internet. It means that you're conscious of all of the various apps and platforms that you log into and that are potentially tracking your behavior. And then on the other end, if, for instance, you literally just learned that privacy settings are a thing, that is okay. Now you know, now you can improve. Okay, so we've had some responses come in here. Looks like we're evenly split right through the middle. So nobody on either extreme end, but kind of right in the middle. And to be honest, this is a thing that is, that I study and that is very important to my professional practice. And I wouldn't rate myself as a privacy pro. I always have room for improvement in that department. So thank you so much for submitting your responses to that poll. I hope that you found that interesting. So, I want to encourage you to check your social media privacy settings. Make sure that you're sharing and receiving content in a way that you are comfortable with. And be conscious in those decisions of whether or not you are logged on when browsing the web, whether you want to use a private browser so that your activity is not tracked. Frankly, there are benefits and drawbacks to both. So I'm not here to tell you the right way to do it, but I think the important thing is to simply be aware of how you choose to engage. And then the last thing that I want to recommend is that you also consume your media widely. Getting back to this idea of filter bubbles, we are all aware of bias in the media, and there are tools that can help you to identify the bias in certain news outlets. The media bias chart from Ad Fontes Media, that's one such tool that I utilize regularly in instruction and things like that. So, you can choose news sources that have a high standard of neutrality and fact-based reporting when possible. And when you do choose to consume content that is more opinion-based or editorial, try to balance that consumption from a variety of sources. So essentially read both from CNN and Fox News, for instance. You may have to actively seek those sources out rather than having them recommended to you in your search results or your social media. But doing that can help kind of retrain your algorithms a little bit. And it's also just a good habit to constantly employ. Okay. So we talked about contextual misrepresentation a bit earlier, that misinformation strategy in which an image is falsely connected with text in order to create a certain implication or make a false narrative seem more credible. The example I have up here is taken from the blog of Thomas Palmer of SUNY at Albany. It's called The Picture Prosecutor. This is an older example. It's from the now defunct fake news site, abcnews.com.co. The image here is real. This is a real signing of a bill, but it's just not the one that's purported in the article. However, the use of a real image here gives an air of legitimacy to this article. So one strategy you can employ to fight against this is to reverse image search. Google Images has a feature where you can save a picture and upload the file, or you can just copy and paste the link where you found the image, and it will search the web and return results for where that image was originally located. I want to talk a little bit about AI content as well. AI generated content and images is also becoming increasingly prevalent online. both for legitimate purposes and nefarious ones. You've probably heard the term deepfake, which refers to a type of fake image or video that's created with AI through deep learning. These are of growing concern. It even recently made headlines when deepfaked images of Taylor Swift, certain explicit images, were circulated on the internet. It is becoming more and more difficult to spot AI-generated images in deepfakes, but here are a few tips. So fine details can be a giveaway. You want to look at elements such as fingers, hair, eyeglasses, jewelry. Do those things look strange or poorly rendered in the image? Are there faces or other elements in the background that look blurry? If it's video content, you can watch for things like audio that's out of sync, poor lip syncing, a lack of facial expression, or strange blinking patterns and other subtle movements. Keep in mind that on some platforms, AI-generated content may be labeled, and we expect that to become more common practice in the months and years ahead, but it's not a cure-all. You're not just going to be able to look for that label that says this is generated by AI, and therefore I know this is AI. You may see images that are not labeled that actually are AI generated. And the technology is going to get better and better, so it's going to be harder to spot. So that's why it's also important that we're relying on all of these basic media literacy skills we've been talking about. Go back to SIFT and use your lateral reading skills to verify the claim in other sources. If it's AI generated text information, use your reverse image search to look up images, et cetera, et cetera. One other resource that I have listed here on this slide is Spot the Troll. That's an interactive quiz from Clemson University. Helps you to spot the differences between legitimate and fake social media accounts. It's a helpful and fun little activity. I encourage you to check it out. Easy URL to remember there. You can just Google it on your own time. Of course, remember that the best practice here is to only follow and friend social media accounts of people you know in real life, or accounts that you can verify belong to real people. Okay, so we talked about the meta literacy framework earlier, and I just want to share a last few habits and dispositions that align with the 4 domains of meta literate learning: behavioral, cognitive, affective, and metacognitive. So the big themes here are, read closely and critically. You want to keep an open mind and a skeptical stance. Don't take things at face value, but work to identify the claims and the evidence and trace them. You want to watch for rhetoric and propaganda techniques and reflect on what you're reading. How does this make you feel? Consider whether your response to a certain article might be due to a histrionic or sensational tone in the article. And then challenge yourself by reading about the issue from a different point of view. Keep in mind that you're both a consumer and a creator of information, not just a passive recipient of information, but a participant in an information ecosystem. So be aware of your role in that environment. You want to think and verify before you share, and reflect on how you would respond to misinformation and fake news when you encounter it. For instance, would you just disregard that information? Would you alert the publisher or the host of that information, alert other users to it, counter the deception with criticism? There's no right or wrong answers here, and your response may vary depending on the context, but I want to encourage and empower you to act responsibly in the face of misinformation. That's what good digital citizenship is all about. And then the last strategy that I will recommend for developing your own media literacy is, of course, a shameless plug, which is to get help from your friendly neighborhood librarian. That's what we're here for. We have expertise in navigating the information landscape effectively and ethically. So any questions that you may have, anything you're not sure about, we're here to help. My image here is an oldie but a goodie, which is a quote from one of my favorite authors and general library advocate and awesome person, Neil Gaiman. Quote, "Google can bring you back 100,000 answers. A librarian can bring you back the right one." As we wind down the presentation here, I do want to briefly highlight the work that librarians like myself are doing on campus to advance learning around media literacy and information literacy in our students and faculty. So we have a set of 5 learning outcomes that we work towards as we advance information and digital literacy through our instruction and our liaison work on campus. These are all based on the Association of College and Research Libraries Framework for Information Literacy, which is our best practices document in professional librarianship, academic librarianship. So I'll briefly walk through these and highlight a few examples of how we either have or how we might approach these learning goals through our lesson plans and the outreach that we do on campus. So first, research needs and library support. Students understand their research needs and how to seek library assistance in meeting them. One activity that I've done recently around this learning goal particularly is an orientation session for students in a first-year seminar here on campus, and we gamified that as an escape room. So there were lots of problem-solving activities involved, just different active learning techniques, but it was all about just a general orientation to the library. Authority and critical mindset. Students are able to evaluate the authority and credibility of information sources with a critical mindset. So a couple of things I've done here. I have a gossip activity that I use in freshman classes where we talk about, imagine that you hear secondhand information about an acquaintance. It's gossip. How do you decide whether or not you can trust this gossip as trustworthy information or not? And then we mirror that discussion with a conversation about the criteria that we use to evaluate research sources. So that's a really helpful activity for students. Also, I've used the SIFT framework certainly and taught students about lateral reading. That's a commonly used practice. Search strategy, search tool comparison, general bibliographic instruction, training students how to use our databases and search tools. Library tools don't operate quite like Google, so sometimes we need to train students a little bit on how those work. Then attribution and value of information. Students understand how to attribute appropriate credit to original ideas and works. We offer things like citation management tools and training on that. I know one of our librarians regularly gives workshops on using EndNote, for instance. One thing that I have not done yet, but I've thought about this for a long time, is developing a lesson utilizing like memes and TikToks that we can use to discuss the way that ideas are transmitted, kind of through that pop culture lens, and the ethics of how we remix information, and using that, like I said, using that pop culture example that students are more familiar with to sort of start that conversation with them. And then lastly, scholarly conversation. Students have an awareness of the scholarly process, their own roles in scholarly conversations, and their academic discipline. So an example of a commonly used strategy here, sometimes you might have students write or edit a Wikipedia article to get them familiar with the idea of kind of how information is constructed. And you can also do activities where you give students maybe a research paper, research article, and have them evaluate the research methods that went into creating that study. So that is an overview of the learning outcomes that we work towards here at the libraries, and the sorts of things that we do in our work of specifically library instruction as we get the word out on campus about these important concepts. Okay. So we're winding down. In the spirit of meta-literacy and engaging that metacognitive domain of learning, I have a little exercise again for you now. I imagine that some of the content today was probably familiar to you. This may have been a refresher in a lot of ways, but hopefully you got a new idea somewhere here or a new perspective on something along the way. So I want you to think about your own situation and how you personally relate to the information ecosystem. After today's session, what is one thing that you can do to improve your own media literacy and to be a better digital citizen? So again, if you're brave enough, leave your comment in the chat. If you would like, you can, change that drop down in the chat to just send a message to me privately. That's fine. Or if you prefer, you can just write it down on a sheet of paper to keep for yourself. So take a couple of minutes to do that. And then we're starting to wind down here. So I just want to thank you in advance for any responses that you're going to send in. I see Laura's saying, review my smartphone app permissions. I agree. I need to definitely go through and do a regular audit of my privacy settings. That's one thing I want to work on. So that's a great idea. So we are winding down the presentation now. I would like to open the floor for any questions that anyone might have. Feel free, again, you can chat them in, or I think we've got a relatively small group, so I'm comfortable if you just want to unmute and speak as well.
Catherine, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I have such a negative reaction to the term post-truth. Do you see this as a transitory term? Even the term itself engenders all kinds of negative feelings, post-truth, because truth is so changing and nebulous in many ways. What is your opinion of that terminology?
Yeah, I understand your perspective on that. It is a pretty strong term. I am inclined to think that, it is a term that we are using to describe this specific moment that we are in. And, as the years unfold ahead of us, and I think we maybe get our footing underneath us with, the digital information ecosystem, that maybe we will have a different lexicon for describing that. But yeah, I certainly understand your point of view on that term, for sure.
When that term engenders fake news or something that is not appropriate.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Nina, for your comment about checking source biases and doing more fact checking. I think that's a great suggestion. Oh. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, there's a comment in the chat about stopping in that SIFT framework, right? Sometimes we're in such a big hurry. Definitely going to try to think more about my sources. Great. I love to hear that. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, do I turn it over back to you now, Nick?
Yeah, I will take it from here if there's no more questions. But
Thank you all so much.
yeah, feel free to keep commenting if you think of something. But yeah, thank you, Katie, for that presentation. It was really engaging. Love the little activities. And thank you everyone for attending. And just a reminder that the next event, because they're always on the third Thursday of the month during the academic year, it will be on March 21st, and it will be titled The Power of Maps. So be on the lookout for that announcement email. And again, this event will be added to the University Library's YouTube channel for future viewing, so feel free to share it with anyone. And thank you once again for coming, and have a great rest of your day.